Hi BookTube, and welcome to a weekly wrap-up which is for two novels: Only Americans Burn in Hell by Jarett Kobek and Optic Nerve by Maria Ganiza. Now, I say they're novels, but both of them demonstrate a very loose approach to the notion of a novel in terms of sort of structured story and forward movement. Of course, an author has the right to assert their work as whatever it is: poetry, novel, whatever. So please take note, Fitzcarraldo. Your fiction are always published in these sort of plain blue covers with white print on them. And yet The Years by Annie Ernaux, which has been shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, which is only open to fiction, ergo this white cover should be blue, because the white covers of Fitzcarraldo are for non-fiction. Now, Fitzcarraldo's argument is that they called this a memoir, and yet when it was published in France, which is the native country of Annie Ernaux, she called it a novel. And, as I say, an author can assert that their book is whatever they want to. So, this Fitzcarraldo calling this non-fiction just by having it in the white imprint, it's completely overridden the wishes of the author, and those sorts of things make me rather annoyed. But anyway, I haven't read this yet. That's my next read. So I'm going to start with Jarett Kobek's Only Americans Burn in Hell. I say this isn't a novel because there is a sort of a putative plot, which even Kobek within the novel and the sort of metafictional elements of it sort of says that he plays fast and loose and isn't always that concerned with tying up all the loose ends, and the magic in it doesn't always work because he's not really interested in telling a novel, but telling a story. The meat of the book is in the metafictional bits, and Kobek giving his opinion on a whole range of things, which I'll come to discuss in a minute. And in a way, it's more like a stand-up comedy routine, although a long one, over the course of the novel, in the sort of vein of Lenny Bruce, criticising society. And it's very much sort of Kobek's own personal views, but done as humour, with jokes, really. And I think ultimately, assuming you're not someone who is wedded to the idea of sort of story and plot, if you pick this book up, you'll like it if you find the jokes funny or the social critique spot on. So I'm going to deal with the plot elements first. There is an island of Amazonian immortal women called Fairyland, and these women possess magic. And they decide to either kill or banish all men. So it's an all-female society. And the Queen of Fairyland comes to hear that a stage play has been written, which seems to tell her story. And, she's sort of intrigued by this, so she goes to Earth in Jacobean London and views the play. And then it happens again in 21st century Los Angeles when the film Wonder Woman comes out, which she hears is again based on her story. So she comes to Los Angeles with her sort of chief enforcer to see the film, and then she sort of sticks around because her daughter, who sort of periodically takes holidays in anywhere on Earth away from the fairyland, has refused to come back, so she's going to search for her. That is the plot, such as it is. But as I say, it's intercut with a lot of Kobek direct metafiction, where he brings elements of his real life, or in the vein of I Hate the Internet, which is his most successful book, where he's just laying into all sorts of institutions and sort of trends and everything. And he doesn't pull any punches. So, for example, he's attacking capitalism, the wealthy 1% of the world, class, race, the publishing industry, the self-publishing industry, Goodreads.com, literary deathmatch gets a kicking, the internet, social media, media conglomerates, Trump, of course, the people who would vote for Trump, and the Democrats who fail to see it coming. And that's the point. He doesn't, everybody gets it, both barrels. So, for example, he criticises sort of the entertainment industry and its rape culture or its sexual harassment culture. But he also criticises the aims of Me Too, that it's sort of deviated from what it was to become all about women in glass ceiling within the entertainment industry rather than sort of, all women. So, as I say, it comes down very much to whether you find the jokes funny. So, as an example of the metafictional element, he reports how he was nominated for a Bad Sex in Literature award, which he was sort of tickled about, but then he realised it was for a scene in I Hate the Internet, where it wasn't actually a sex scene, it was talking about a sex scene sort of after the event had happened. And he reckoned that that was the scene that was nominated rather than the only actual sex scene, because the actual sex scene was a homosexual sex scene. And he says that the bad sex writing in literature only seems to recognise heterosexual sex. And then that sort of, because this is like a sort of stand-up comedy routine, there are lots of callbacks by which, he's planted the seed of an idea, whether it's in the form of a joke or just a statement of an idea, and then periodically in the book he comes back. That's why it's called a callback. And, this is just one of the many callback sort of routines that he sets up in the book. And, I don't really need to say much more than this. I'm just going to read out some short passages to give you an idea of whether you find the jokes funny or not. So this is on... So the two, this is one of the scenes where the two Amazon women are in Los Angeles, and they've arrived in their sort of, islands, fur pelts. And obviously, when they go to see the Wonder Woman film, they blend in because people have gone in fancy dress. But they realise pretty soon that once they're outside the cinema that they don't blend in. Celia pointed out that their clothes, the haute couture of fairyland, was going to attract attention. She cast a spell. Celia wasn't well versed enough in contemporary American fashion to pick clothes, so she let the magic do the work of a personal stylist. The magic made the woman look like recent transplants to Echo Park, which was a traditionally Latino neighbourhood that had gentrified into a fashionable enclave of upscale dining and high-level annoyance. The woman's fur-clad haute couture transformed into designer denim, vintage metal t-shirts, Balenciaga sneakers and Marni handbags. Rose Byrne's t-shirt said Emperor. Celia's t-shirt said Sabotage. Neither of the women knew it, but the magic had failed in its job as a personal stylist. Vintage metal t-shirts were the hot look of the previous summer. Now I love that because it's debunking magic and magical realism. He debunks fantasy and supernatural writing, and it's just no matter how powerful the magic, that it can change their costume, in the blink of an eye, what it can't do is reproduce the fickleness of the fashion industry that changes from season to season. I just found that really funny. Then on. So this is him debunking fantasy, or at least a fantasy that is Harry Potter. The Harry Potter books were a series of fantasy novels about an English boarding school, wherein the most fantastical thing that happened was a complete absence of buggery and same-sex handjobs. I don't need to say anything more about that, I don't think. In 2014 AD, there was a news story about a pair of 12-year-old girls who stabbed another 12-year-old girl. When the girls were apprehended, they were asked why they had tried to murder their BFF. The girls told the cops that they were killing for Slender Man. Slender Man was an imaginary supernatural character that had been created by someone on the internet. Slender Man wore a bad suit and he hung out with children and he inspired tedious academic papers by bottom feeders. When the girls were asked why Slender Man wanted them to kill, they said that Slender Man would reward their human sacrifice with a resplendent palace in hell, where they would rule for eternity among the damned. The bottom feeders who wrote academic papers about Slender Man weren't that different from the girls who stabbed their BFF. They were looking for tenure at state-funded universities, which meant that they too were seeking a resplendent palace in hell, where they too would rule for eternity amongst the damned. I don't know about you, but I find that stuff kind of funny. Okay, and Before she left New York, Denise introduced Fern to the demi-mondes of Manhattan's East Village and the Lower East Side, two overlapping ethnic ghettos that had transformed into cesspools of petty crime and cheap drugs, and were gentrifying into cesspools of international money laundering and the expensive drugs required to fuel international money laundering. And that's what I like about Kobek, that in the space of one paragraph of, 100, 150 words, he just nails some sort of social or economic injustice. And he does this time and time again in here. And I think this will probably be the last piece that I read. So this is about, he's sort of lanced Christianity for promoting Islamophobia, but now he's going to lance atheism because he's saying that's not the right thinking either. Historical arguments against Christianity tended to be delivered in tones of pearl-clutching horror, usually by subpar British intellectuals pimping their accent in America, a country where sounding like an Oxbridge twat conferred an unearned credibility. Yes, the Crusades were horrible. Yes, the Inquisition was awful. Yes, they shouldn't have burned witches in Salem. Yes, there is an unfathomable amount of sexually abused walking wounded. Yes, every Christian country has oriented itself around the rich and done nothing but abuse the fuck out of its poor. But it's not like the secular conversion of the industrialised world has alleviated any of the horrors. Read the news. And then there's this sort of section, if you can see this, where it's just got rape, murder, rape, murder, rape, murder, sort of ad infinitum. All secularism has done, really, is remove a yoke from the rich. They'd always been horrible, but at least when they still paid lip service to Christian virtues, they could be shamed into philanthropy. Now they use market forces to slide the whole thing into feudalism. The New York University built a campus with slave labour, by which he's referring to the Abu Dhabi campus, in the 21st century AD, and has suffered no rebuke. Applications are at an all-time high. So, as I say, I think that, there's no real forward movement of this. There's lots of callbacks. There's lots of it, sort of his arguments coming back on themselves. Everybody gets it. No one is spared. The fantasy plot he's sending up at the same time as he's writing it, and that is amusing as well. I think other people might feel a bit more precious about how sacred it should be treated. But there's no discipline in this book at all, really. It's just an excuse for him to, as was I Hate the Internet, although there were slightly more consistent characters than I Hate the Internet. I don't find that a problem. I would say that if somehow you could splice the literary discipline of David Foster Wallace, who I find a bit turgid, with the sort of light touch of this, you would get a great 21st century American novelist, because the weaknesses of Kobek is he doesn't have any literary discipline, and the weaknesses of Foster Wallace is that it's a bit dull, really. I mean, I know lots of people say it's very funny, but this is laugh out loud funny in places, whereas Foster Wallace is, you might crack a smile or whatever. So I give this 4.5 stars. It's for me it's an enjoyable, timely read. I did like the metafictional elements when he brings in his own life. The only really upsetting part of this is that it turns out that Jarett Kobek is a Guns N' Roses fan. Okay, and on to another non-novel really. This is Optic Nerve by Maria Ganiza. It's a novel from Argentina. And this is the female character in this takes refuge, anytime life gets too stressful, she takes refuge in art, fine art. And, she's describing paintings that she has seen, and then gives little sort of treatises on the life of the painters who painted them. And they're sort of refracted back through things that are happening in her life. Although, interesting, a lot of the real life things that she's discussing involve other people, like a best friend or her parents or an unfavoured uncle. She's sort of hiding from herself a lot in this book, I think. And it reminded me of Jessie Greengrass's Sight, although in one way I think it's superior, because Jessie Greengrass' Sight was about sort of motherhood. That's sort of in three sections, where the first one is about a grown-up daughter visiting her ailing mother as the daughter is pregnant for the first time. The second section is when she was a girl. The daughter was a little girl, and her mother always used to park her in the summer holidays with her grandmother, who was a practicing psychoanalyst. And then the third part is she, once the baby has been born and her mother has died, so it's that sort of chain of motherhood that she's sort of trying to penetrate. And she uses a different scientist to illustrate each one of those sections. Freud is the middle one, the guy who invented X-rays is the first one, and the third one is the guy who started the Hunterian Museum by collecting all these sort of specimens and stuff. But they're very much, you're taken out of the personal stuff when she gives the treatise on the scientist. This is much more cleverly done in that they're broken up. So you might have personal, painting, artist, and then back to the personal within one chapter. So they're much smaller bites in each. So it doesn't seem, you're not dragged out of the tone of her personal life by having to read some sort of pseudo-academic treatise about an artist. So the artists she talks about are people like Mark Rothko, Courbet, Henri Rousseau. Who else does she talk about? I'd remembered them all earlier. Some Latin American artists who I haven't heard of. Who's the other one? Quite big name she talks about. Toulouse-Lautrec. And the Lautrec and the Rothko treatises, for want of a better word, are excellent. I'd say their treatises are not that long. This is not a big, thick book. And to be fair, neither was Sight. But I just thought this was much more satisfying. And in a way, there's no destination in this. She's running away from herself, running, through art. And you're kind of invited to do the same thing. Not run away, but just bask in art. See art through the written word. And it works. This is enjoyable. I gave this 4 stars. But again, if you're looking for a plot, or even if you're looking for a character study, I don't think there's that much of a character study other than sort of quite oblique and tangential through the art. So there you have it. That was my weekly wrap-up of 2 non-novels, Optic Nerve by Maria Ganiza and Only Americans Burn in Hell by Jarett Kobek. Okay, till next time. Thanks very much.